We're sitting here right now with Wally Lamb, whose new book is called We Are Water. It's the first since you wrote The Hour I First Believed. That was 2008. Welcome, first of all.
Thank you, Rich. Good to be with you.
The dynamic of a family, occasionally a broken or a family going through turmoil, is a theme that resurfaces in a lot of your books. In this case, Annie O, the main character, the narrator, is a woman. Can you say a little bit about writing in that character and how that was for you?
Sure, yeah. I've actually got, she and her husband are the two central characters. And her husband, Orion, he's a university psychologist, and Annie is an artist. And the sort of inciting incident of the novel is that she makes a decision to leave him and her long-term marriage for a woman, her gallery owner in New York that represents her work. And so the story becomes a study of the repercussions of a decision like that, and not only for the couple, but also for their 3 grown children. So I actually have 8 different, I counted them the other day, I have 8 different voices who speak in this novel. Half of them are women and half of them are men. And Annie was a tricky one to write. Of course, my first novel had a female protagonist and I was speaking in the voice of Dolores Price, but she was pretty much out there, and I could figure her out more easily than I could Annie. But in the writing of the novel, I realized that Annie has a really dark secret that she has kept since she was about 5 or 6 years old. And so as in writing, I began to know more and more of her story, then I could take that story and run with it. So I understood her on a much deeper level at that point.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you decided on this topic and what brought you to it?
Well, I was doing an interview in my hometown, Norwich, Connecticut, and promoting a book that had just come out. And the interviewer asked that dreadful question to somebody who is still in recovery from the last book. He said, "What's next for Wally?" And I said, I was thinking, I have no idea, but I had to come up with an answer. And I said, well, maybe I'll write about the flood. Now, if you come from Norwich, you probably know that, I was referring to the flood of 1963. I was just an 8-year-old kid at the time, but the flood water came close to where we lived, and it killed people, and so I just, lo and behold, that actually happened. I was just fudging it, but I started writing about that, and then I got interested in a lot of local stuff. There was a guy. He was an African American, untrained artist. He was an outsider artist who had been a laborer and then just started painting obsessively without knowing why he was doing it. Couldn't sell any work in his own time. Died under mysterious circumstances that was probably murder, and then became famous posthumously. And so I took these 2 separate hometown events that really had nothing to do with one another, the flood and this guy Ellis Ruley's life and death, and I put them there, and the story sort of jumped back and forth between them.
Now, I know a little bit about the way you write, and from what I understand, you dive into a book and the characters begin to take on lives of their own, and you sort of follow them.
Yeah, it's sort of bizarre in a way. It's sort of like, I think I'm one of the few adults that's still playing with his imaginary friends, but they do become these characters. I'm sympathetic toward them. I'm not always approving of what they're doing and saying, and even though I'm writing in their point of view, or from their point of view, I'm actually usually feeling very parental about them. I worry about them, sort of like the way you would worry about a wayward child of yours that you can't quite control. And so they take me to places that I didn't necessarily think I was going to go to.
So in the morning when you start to write, you're not sure exactly where you're headed at the end. You have a general sense of the story, but the characters will take you by the hand and bring you there?
Right. I always feel very envious of writers who have it outlined and write toward some preconceived ending. And I'd love to work that way, but it just doesn't for me. I once was on book tour following John Irving, and every place that I went to, every city, they would ask me, do you know the ending of the story when you start? And my answer is no, I don't know until I get there. And lots of times people would give me funny looks. And so in one city, I said, "What, why is that a dissatisfying answer?" And some woman said, "Well, because when John Irving was here last week, he said, of course you have to know the ending before you can start the book." So I guess the moral of that story is what's true for one writer is not necessarily true for another one.
How has your own family life influenced your writing?
I had a childhood that was not as unhappy or chaotic as the childhoods of my characters. Conventional, lower middle class family in rural Connecticut. And then I grew up and taught in the same high school that where I'd been a student for about 25 years. So I was very local, very, not very worldly at all when I started writing. But having children of our own, we have 3 sons who are now grown, but that was very informing to me, sort of being there for each of the stages of their development. And it's no accident. I don't quite fully understand the dynamic of it, but I don't think it's any accident that I started writing fiction the exact same month, May of 1981, that our first kid was born. So for me, fiction writing and fatherhood are kind of entwined at the roots.
Did you know when you started, before you started to write that first book, that you would be a writer? You wanted to be a writer? Was it pulling inside you before then?
No, not at all. I was an English teacher at that point and had been for about 9 or 10 years. And so when you read great novels like To Kill a Mockingbird or The Catcher in the Rye with students, and you do that, for several years in a row, you can begin to see not only the story and the characters and the symbolism and all that kind of stuff, but for me, I was able to start looking at the architecture of these novels, the scaffolding, if you will, and without realizing that it was teaching me for something that would later become my life. That was happening. But I think when I was a kid, I didn't particularly like to read or write. I did school assignments, but I loved to draw and spent a lot of my free time drawing. And so I think that was the leg up. I think that was the real preparation for me. The imagery and still when I write, I can sometimes see the story visually in my head, sometimes like a little movie or sometimes just a real striking image that is interesting to me. And so I think that visual orientation really prepared me for a later life as a writer. I started writing when I was about 30. So I was late to the game, and unlike a lot of the writers that I know, I wasn't keeping a journal when I was a kid. It all just sort of happened unexpectedly.
Well, that's inspirational probably for a lot of writers, wannabe writers. But for a lot of writers, that reading To Kill a Mockingbird and knowing it as well as you do can be intimidating. It can be paralyzing because you see amazing fiction and all of a sudden you envision yourself as a writer and you see your own name in print. Was that ever a difficulty for you to see yourself in the role as the writer that you're now, people may be teaching their students?
Yeah, I still scratch my head and go, how did this happen? But sometimes ignorance can serve you well. Shortly after I started writing short stories, I slammed into the wall of everything I didn't know about how to write publishable fiction. And so I entered a program it was a low residency program. My kids were little. I couldn't be away for whole semesters. So I entered a low residency program at Vermont College of the Fine Arts. And I worked with a wonderful writer named Gladys Swan. And she said to me in one of our initial meetings, "Why do you want to do this?" It's not something I had asked myself. And so I had to make up an answer on the spot. And I said, well, every year when it's time for my high school kids and I to read, To Kill a Mockingbird, it's one of the books that they read because they want to, not because they have to. And I said, I guess I would like to do that, write something that motivated kids out of pure pleasure. And she didn't like that answer. Gladys she made a face and she said, no, she said, don't predetermine who your audience is going to be. She said, write it because you need to write it, and then have the faith that if you stay with it and you revise and you get feedback from other people, that it will find the audience that was meant to have it. And so that was great advice, particularly after the Oprah Book Club phenomenon that suddenly put me on a much bigger stage. And I had, for a while there, I was really, trying to please, these new, millions of readers that I had. And I had to kind of remind myself of Gladys's advice. Don't worry about the audience. Do the best you can. Humble yourself to the process. Get as much feedback as people will give you, and then just get it out there and let it have its own life.